Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
And Houston, how do you hear?
Station, we have you loud and clear. Iowa Public Television, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is the Iowa Public TV Kids Clubhouse, and we're here today with some amazing Iowa kids. How do you hear me?
I have you loud and clear. How do you hear me?
You sound great, Peggy. Thanks for being with us today. Congrats on your mission and your most recent spacewalk.
I'm very happy about both. It's a great experience being back up here on the International Space Station.
Well, Peggy, we have our first question from an Iowa student for you right now. Let's hear it.
All right, first up we have Abby.
What skills did you learn growing up on a farm that helps you with your job today as an astronaut?
I think probably the most important skill for me growing up on a farm was working hard, watching my parents work really hard to get everything done every day, you know, from sunrise to sunset. It was impressive, the work ethic, and I think that has contributed to my success.
All right, next we have Bryce.
Is there a doctor or nurse on the space station if you get sick?
Actually, we do a lot of different kinds of training, and one of the training things that we do is to train to be a doctor. We can't replace being a doctor completely, but we can train on all the different skills. And then we talk to doctors on the ground, and they tell us the specific skills. So, for instance, we learn how to do stitches, or we learn how to use the AED, the automatic defibrillator. We can learn how to inject medications so that we can be doctors on ourselves up here.
And next is Bailey.
What are your favorite experiments you are doing up in space?
We're doing a lot of different types of experiments. I like the ones that are hands-on, where I get to use my hands the most. For instance, yesterday I was working on an experiment called fluid shifts, and we're looking at how the body changes with the lack of gravity. The fluids aren't drawn down to our legs like they are on the ground, and we think they may have some impact. That may have some impact on our vision. And so that's one experiment. I like doing the ultrasound. We do other different types of experiments looking at how materials react in zero gravity, because fluids are very different in zero gravity, different than what we experience on the ground. And actually, I wanted to show you just a little demonstration of that, just to kind of give you a feel for how that works. And it kind of goes to answering another question about how do you drink fluids in space. So if you look at this, we have to have a drink bag in order to drink our fluids in space. And we have to have a special straw with a closure on it that keeps the liquid from coming out of the top. But fluids behave very differently in gravity. So you can see the liquid is coming out and forming a little ball on the end of the straw. And if we're really careful, we can make a ball here. And hopefully we won't make too much of a mess when we release it from the straw. And see how the ball floats through space? I'm going to grab it, though. So you can see fluids behave very differently. They form a ball. And in space, we want to understand how fluids and gases separate. And that's important, like for how rocket engines run and how we run a lot of different systems. Every system, the hydraulic systems, the fluid systems in the space station can get gases inside. And we have one experiment that's looking at how to use columns of special materials to try and separate gases and liquids.
Next is Kelsey.
How do you feel about making history by being the first woman to be in charge of the space station twice?
It's funny, I don't really think a lot about that. I've been very lucky to have had the opportunities that I have had. And so I don't really think about it in terms of being the first person to have done something. I think it's kind of cool, but it's not something that I think about too much.
All right, next is Sydney.
What was the worst part about training?
The worst part about training, well, I love a lot of the training, but probably the hardest thing for me was actually learning different languages. Up here on board the International Space Station, we have people from all over the world. Primarily on board the space station, we speak in English, but in order to get here right now, we're flying up on the Russian Soyuz vehicles, and so we have to be able to speak Russian very well. And so for me, that has been probably the most difficult thing to learn, even harder than orbital mechanics.
Wow. Okay, next we have Willie.
If you could take one person to space with you, who would you take and why?
That's a really interesting question. I think I'd probably pick my husband. Besides the fact that I like hanging out with him, he's really good at fixing things. And when you're on board a space station, you want to have everything running all the time, but it doesn't always. So I think I'd pick my husband.
Perfect. Deja's next.
Who is your inspiration?
Actually, I'm really lucky. I think in my life I've had a lot of different mentors, people who have helped me and inspired me by their work ethic. But probably in order to say I have an inspiration to become an astronaut, I would have to attribute that to first seeing Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon. And then when I graduated from high school, they picked the first female astronauts, among them Sally Ride and Ellen Baker and Shannon Lucid, a lot of really neat women that inspired me as well and made me feel like it was possible to become an astronaut.
Okay, Aubrey's next.
Are the hours in a day the same in space?
Can you repeat your question again?
It was, are the hours in a day the same in space?
Actually, that is a really good question because time is the same, obviously, in space. We are traveling, and, an hour up here, I look at my watch, and it's the same as an hour on the ground. But it's really interesting because we're going at 17,500 miles an hour. That is really, really fast. What that means is once every hour and a half, we're going around the Earth. And in that time, when we're going around the Earth, we see one sunrise, and about half an orbit later, 45 minutes later, we see a sunset. And so over the course of a day, we see about 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets. So it makes the day seem a little different. But as you can see, in the modules that we work in, we don't have a lot of windows, so we don't get to see that all the time. But when we have some free time, that's one of the things we like to do is look out the window and watch the Earth below. And about half of the time it's in daylight and half of the time it's in darkness because we're going around the Earth that fast.
Okay, now we have Hudson.
How did your body change when you were in space?
Actually, that is a really important question for us. We're trying to answer and understand all those changes that occur. Now, we've known for a long time, for instance, that our bones, because we don't have gravity pushing against us, we are floating all the time, and our bones don't get the same activation that they do on the ground, just standing or walking around. Even sitting in a chair, you're getting more bone activation than we are up here in space. And so it's important for us to exercise a lot to try and maintain our bone and muscle. We've learned over the years, we've been living up here on the space station for 17 years now, with people coming and going every 6 months or so. And we've learned over that time what it takes in terms of exercise in order to maintain the muscle and the bone strength. And now, we're trying to do the next level of experiments, trying to understand what's the smallest piece of exercise hardware we can use and the least amount of exercise, so that when we go on long duration missions to Mars or even beyond, we know how to protect our bodies against those changes. Other changes that occur within our body are that fluid shifts I talked about, because the gravity is no longer pulling our fluids down toward our legs. And so our body is getting rid of excess fluids. And there are lots of changes potentially in our eyes as well that we're trying to better understand. Another experiment that I'm working on is looking at how oxidative stress also might have an impact on the long-term health of astronauts. And that's, again, just trying to understand if this environment of being in microgravity, of being in a higher radiation environment, might be affecting our bodies long-term, for instance, even our cardiovascular system.
Great. Next we have Loudon.
Has your ship ever malfunctioned on any of your trips?
Has the ship ever malfunctioned? Well, there were a couple of times when we had some things go wrong. One time we were deploying a solar array up here on the space station, and as we were deploying the solar array, it tore. And so we had to figure out a way to repair that. And we had some great help from the team on the ground, going into a lot of detail, figuring out how we could make some fixes up here on orbit. And we had some folks do a spacewalk, and we fixed that solar array, and it's still working out there now. Even that, and that was almost 9 years ago, so it's still doing great. Another malfunction that happened was during my last re-entry. I was coming on a Soyuz on my last trip, and the re-entry was our vehicle didn't separate from the engine compartment the way it was supposed to. But because of all the redundancies, in spaceflight we want to be able to protect for things that go wrong, so we have a backup system. And because of all those redundancies, everything turned out fine. So it's nice to have backups to the backups in many cases. That's what keeps us alive.
Wonderful. And next we have Rachel.
How do you keep in touch with your family in space?
Well, we're actually able to call them when we have a special satellite, one that's working, the one that we're using now to communicate right now. And I can call on my computer and just make a phone call on internet, using internet protocol on the phone. And so I feel like I stay in touch with them very well. I also have email access to them all the time as well. So I feel very connected with my family and friends, but also, we talk to the ground team every day when we're doing our work. They help us understand when we have questions and help us get the job done from the ground as well, because we have this capability of video conferencing and being able to talk real time.
Excellent. Next we have Jays.
What was your favorite training you did to train to be an astronaut?
What was my favorite training? Well, there's a lot of really cool training that we do to become an astronaut, but all the astronauts come from different backgrounds. I happen to be a scientist, and some of our astronauts are military pilots or have very different experiences and backgrounds. And so when we come in and become an astronaut, we have to learn all the skills that everybody knows. So for me, being a scientist, coming in and learning to fly in the T-38 jet training aircraft so that I would have that operational knowledge of how things work and the checklist, rigor, etc. Those kinds of things, that to me was the most fun, was learning to fly in the T-38.
next is Garrett.
What is it like when you get off the spaceship?
What is it like when you get off the spaceship? Well, you know, some people get sick when they come to space, but I'm one of the people that gets sick when I go home from space. I think it's because I miss space. But anyway, the first day or two when I get back home, it's not any fun because gravity really makes me feel very, 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 very heavy. I forget how heavy I was when I'm up here, able to float and spin around without any effort.
That was so cool. We have Brock.
Are you close to discovering the best way for humans to live in space? If yes, please explain.
Actually, you know, that's the primary goal of our research that we are doing up here, at least the human research, is looking at how to keep humans healthy here in space for long duration periods of time, because it's important if we're going to learn to fly, going to fly to Mars, and it's going to be a 6-month trip to get there, 6 or 9 months. We need to know how to live in space. We need to know how our bodies are going to react, especially if we're going to live on Mars for a while before we fly back. So we have to have a really good understanding of that environment, of what it's like. You know, how do our bodies adapt to this zero gravity environment?
Okay, and here's Ayla.
What do you do for entertainment in space?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question. Can you repeat that, Ayla?
The question is, what do you do for entertainment in space?
Okay, for entertainment, we, like I said, we can talk to our family and friends on the IP phone, but probably the best entertainment is looking out the window. We have an incredible view of our planet just below us, 250 miles below us. We can see the curve of the Earth. We can see so many things as we're going by the Earth. It's interesting, even when we're going over water, but even more so when we're going over the land masses. You can see different geographical features that are not apparent, from when you're on Earth because you're so close. And from this perspective, we can see the Earth, and it's incredibly beautiful. The thing that always strikes me is that every time we go around the planet, the Earth underneath us is moving slightly, and so we don't see the same spot on the Earth every time we come around. And each time the sun is in a different angle too, and so the sunlight may light up things and make things show up on one orbit, and then on another orbit, when you're passing over this area of the Earth at the same time, it might look completely different because the sun angle is different, and so or the season is different. You get to see the seasons change from up here as well when we're on 6-month missions. Right now, there's a lot of the planet that's covered in snow. And I think you guys might have some ice down there too, so hopefully you're staying warm.
I think we broke 50 degrees yesterday, so the ice is gone. Next up is Derek.
What is your biggest concern when you became commander of the space station?
That's a very important question. As the commander of the space station, the primary responsibility of the entire crew is yours, plus the safety of the station as well. So it's a big responsibility, and it's one that you think about even as a crew member, but as the commander, the responsibility falls on your shoulders. So that's primarily the safety of the crew and the safety of the vehicle.
All right, next is Elliot.
Do you get scared?
I think probably all of us get scared to some degree, but the thing that we do as astronauts to try and keep that from being a problem when we get into a bad situation is all our training. For instance, if there were a fire on board the space station or a depressurization of the space station, we practice this a lot, and we understand, what is my role, what is every crew member's role, what are we going to do in order to make sure that we stay safe and that we save this station. And so I think the training keeps us from being so scared that you can't react. I think it makes you understand what your responsibility is, what your job is, and it gives you something to think about besides just being scared, because we all get scared.
Dr. Peggy Whitson, good luck on the rest of your mission from all of us at IPTV.
Well, actually, I wanted to show you a couple more things, just because we didn't come up in some of the questions, but, some of the food that we have on board, somebody put these little Skittles into a ball, and I think it kind of is neat how they show how the lack of gravity works. Another question that young people ask me a lot is about the food. So we have different kinds of food, and some of it is it's dehydrated. So this looks like green beans to you, doesn't it? This is green beans, but it's not got any water in it, so you have to add water before you eat it. It's got this special little port at the front that you have to add the water to. And then we have other things that are in pouches that are irradiated. So this one is minestrone soup, but we have some types of chicken and other things that can also come in this, and that way, and it's packaged this way so that we can just heat it up and eat it, and it stays for a long time good here on board the space station. So we do a lot of eating out of pouches and bags. And then there are some other foods that you might find a little more familiar, like these guys. So we have a little fun with our food, too. But it was great talking to all you guys. I wish you all the best, and dream big.
Thanks to all the kids for joining us today in the studio. Thanks to Peggy Whitson for answering their great questions. And, of course, a huge thank you to all of you for watching.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event.
Thank you to all participants and guests from Iowa Public Television. Station, please stand by while we reconfigure communications.